Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Get ready to be inspired, hear success stories, and learn tips and principles for bringing out the best in everyone.
Hi, everyone. This is Deborah Rue, and you are watching or listening to Human Potential at Work. As a reminder, I am the CEO of Rue Global Impact, and we really believe that the world works better when everyone can be included. My guest today is somebody that I've known about for years, but I only recently met him. I met him about 6 months ago, and he is a sergeant. He is a sergeant in the police force, and he actually has police officers that report to him. He has a very distinguished career of over 31 years, and he serves in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is the state that I'm in. And so I want to welcome Sergeant Tim Sutton to the show. So welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Deborah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation. We, of course, when we first talked about you being on the show, I'm blessed that my show is booked out with amazing guests 2 to 3 months in advance. But the world was very different whenever I invited you to be on the show, and I am really glad that you have agreed to actually do a series with me. So you will be on the show this week, and then we are actually going to feature you in August and October, and hopefully beyond that as well. But it's just such an interesting time in the world, Tim. That's certainly true. But why don't we start by you telling the audience a little bit about your background? I know you are currently in the law enforcement field. You've been in the law enforcement field for 31 years. You must have started when you were 10 or 8. But it's interesting. It must be interesting being a police officer and being a sergeant that has police officers reporting to you during times like this. But first of all, let's just tell the audience who Tim is.
Tim, like you said, is a 31-year veteran police officer. I started my career in 1989, and I worked, had just gotten out of college with a business degree, and was trying to decide what to do. Should I go back to school or work on a master's, or, just figure out my life's plan. And a friend of mine came and said, "Hey, I've applied with the police department. You ought to come and take the tests with me." And I thought I could go for a job. So I went and took the test and went through the whole background process. And 6 months later, I was standing at a flagpole getting yelled at and screamed at, and my head was shaved. And I was on the ground doing push-ups because somebody in my squad had done something wrong. So we were all being held accountable. And I worked for the police department for about 4 years. And it was very eye-opening just to see a different type of society. A lot of things you don't hear about or see about, or most people are not exposed to. After about 4 years, I decided to come back to my home locality and to come work for my agency I'm working for now. And I did patrol work. I worked midnight shift. I was out riding around the late hours of the nights, keeping the community safe. I did some plainclothes work where I grew my hair long and had a beard and went and did a lot of surveillance and following people who we thought were career criminals. And in 1999, I got promoted to the rank of sergeant, and I was put on the shift to supervise deputies working the road. And I've pretty much stayed there till today. I enjoy being out on the road, riding the roads, trying to mentor a lot of the other officers that are out there. In 2002, my sheriff at the time came to me and said, "I want you to run a program." And I said, "Well, okay, what is it?" And he said, "I don't know, it helps you find missing people." So it ended up being a tracking program to deal with people who have cognitive disorders who would wander off or elope and get away from the families. So we would put a little watch-sized transmitter on their wrist or their ankle, and should they wander off, a caregiver calls 911 immediately, because it is an emergency. When anybody goes missing under those circumstances, it is an emergency, and we need to get there as quick as possible. Many times the families figure, "Oh, I'll go out and search for an hour, 2 hours." Well, we're losing time at that point. But as I
Because
went
we don't
out,
want to bother, but we don't want to bother the
exactly,
police.
exactly. And that's one thing I have a difficult, and my deputies that help me with this have a difficult time getting across to the families is you are not bothering us. That is why we are here.
Right.
And we need that call. You know, average person can walk 4 miles an hour. Now, when
Okay.
they've gone out and searched for 1 hour, you're talking 4 miles north, south, east, and west. So that's a huge search area. So I tell them, call us immediately. We're on the way with our equipment. We can start tracking. If you find them in the meantime, just call. We're already out there. We'll turn
Right.
around and go back to doing what we were doing. So, you know, many times these caregivers and these parents dealing with individuals with disabilities, they feel like they're being a burden to us. And when I was sworn as a police officer, I was sworn to protect and serve all, not any particular population. And this is one population, the disability population, who you know, in my heart, I have a passion to go out there and help and protect and try to keep them safe. But when I went out and met the first young man with autism, he was 6 years old, but as the first boy I had ever known to have autism that I had interacted with. I'm sure I had in the past, but I didn't recognize it. And one thing that really struck me, he was 6 years old, his name's Matthew. And that's a whole nother story. It's an amazing story with Matthew and his twin brother and the mom. But when I went into the house, I'm in uniform, and he just started to gravitate towards me. He was non-speaking, but he walked over and he put his hand on my weapon. And myself and his mother, we're saying, you know, Matthew, don't do that. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. Well, he got that message, but then he would come up and start leaning against it because he wanted to be in contact with that weapon. He wanted
Guns
to
are
touch
cool when you're a
Yeah.
6-year-old boy.
So, you know, that we kept trying to redirect him and get him to focus, head in a different direction. Well, I was sitting at the kitchen table with his mother and father, and I felt something under my chair. And I looked down under the chair, and Matthew was laying on his back, and he had his finger up in the barrel of my weapon. He wanted to touch the weapon. Well, that really got me thinking. I said, Matthew has autism, and many times with autism, unless there's an underlying condition, they look no different than anybody else. Looks just like everybody else. So I said, let's bump it ahead 15, 20 years. I'm standing in a store, getting a cup of coffee or whatever. Matthew walks in, runs over to me and grabs my weapon.
Right.
As a law enforcement officer, I've been trained that somebody puts their hand on their weapon, they're trying to take my weapon, they're trying to assault me, and I'm going home. At the end of the night, my number one goal is going home.
Mm-hmm.
Number two goal is everybody goes home safe and sound. But with somebody grabbing my weapon, I interpret that as he's trying to get my weapon, he's trying to hurt me. And then I thought about it. I said, so I grabbed Matthew as an adult, and let's say he has some skin sensitivity issues, where maybe a simple touch feels like razor blades cutting through his skin, which I've met many individuals on the spectrum who have difficult time wearing certain clothes.
Right.
I met one little girl, all she could wear was a silk nightgown. Everything else hurt her skin. So let's imagine, you know, I kept running this scenario, and I said, let's imagine I grab his arm and it feels like razor blades. Well, anybody who feels razor blades, whether you've got autism, intellectual disability, developmental disability, even neurotypical individuals, you're going to try to get away from that. You're going to fight or flight. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's fighting, trying to get away from it. And there's so many other elements I discovered with autism and some of the disabilities. The hypotonia, where many times the muscles are not fully developed, which could be a problem if I was trying to take him into custody. The huge adrenaline rushes makes them very strong at times. So I'm in for a fight for my life. So I started thinking about that. And as the years went by and I met more and more people, you know, I've dealt with all kinds of cognitive issues, but I started to realize, and listening to the radio and looking at the calls for service I had been on over the years, I started to realize that law enforcement, public safety, you know, fire, EMS, we've been responding, and we continue to respond on so many calls for service that are directly related to the disability. But in some cases, those disabilities are, they're not picked up on. There are no telltale signs. We interpret things as, oh, the child needs to behave, they've got bad behavior, when in fact it may be a disability, it may be autism, and they're reacting to something and they are overstimulated or have a meltdown, which leads to the families having to call law enforcement. So I
Right,
think
right.
that's why I think it's important and imperative for officers, public safety in general, and I think the general public ought to understand it. But officers, we have the tools that hurt people and take lives. That's
Right.
why I think it's
Let's
imperative that
let's
populations needs the training.
I agree. And so I'm going to just back up a little.
Yes.
And, of course, we've seen, we are recording this episode during the middle of the COVID crisis pandemic. There has
Right.
been, once again, sadly, there has been police brutality against citizens, and there has been violence, towards police officers as well.
Right.
And it's just really, everything's a mess. But at the same time, we
Right.
know that there have been mistakes made by police officers with people with disabilities. There unfortunately was a man that was killed that had Down syndrome that just wanted to stay and watch the movie again. There's been a lot of misinformation, and
Ethan Saylor, yes.
and there is a lot of, people, and so I really want to dig into these issues in a broader
Right.
way. So the reality is, there are a lot of people that, have become more and more and more distrustful of our
Right.
police. And
Right.
I'm hearing a lot of people, and I'm feeling this way as well, feeling that our police have become too militarized.
Right.
And so I think one thing we have to do as a society is try to understand what we need our police departments our police officers to be. And we have to remember also that police officers are often first responders, but they are not the only first responders.
Right.
I know that you came to my family and we put my husband in this program because my
Right.
husband has dementia, and unfortunately his dementia is advancing, and he had never gotten lost. But we live in a very rural area of Virginia with a lot
Right.
of land. I don't own it all, but there's a lot of land around us, and I didn't want to accidentally lose him. And so you were very kind to come in a very thoughtful way, talk to my husband about this so that he would feel like he wasn't broken because you were doing this. And so I
Right.
think there's an obligation that society has to understand what our first responders are trying to do to help us. We're
Right.
not afraid of our fire people. We're not our firefighters. We're not afraid of our emergency response people, but actually people are afraid of officers. And I remember, because you and I become friends, you told me about the first time, and I just want to tell people, because you're not going to be able to tell this by looking at Tim maybe, but Tim happens to be a very tall man. I don't know how tall you are, but 6'4", 6'3". Right. And then you put the hat on, which you have some stories about the hat, but you're pretty, and you've got your police uniform on with your guns and your tasers, and you're a little intimidating looking at
Right.
you. Just
Right.
reality. If I know I get nervous every time I used to get pulled over frequently for speeding. So
Not by me.
we as society, that's right. Well, if you're speeding, I need to
Yeah.
follow the law. So,
Right.
there's a reason why we don't want people speeding, because we
Right.
see that people get killed, and 1 million people all over the world get killed in car accidents every
Right.
single year. So our lead foot can cause us to lose control of our vehicles and hurt ourselves and a lot of others. So there's a reason
Right.
why society has rules. But, since we know this is going to be multi-part series, one thing I'd really like to dig into a little bit more, from your perspective. You have perspective. I actually came and talked to you as the violence was mounting, and as I watched the video of that police officer leaning on that man's neck and killing him, and the police officer standing around him not stopping it. And I was curious what you thought about that as someone that is the manager of other police officers.
Right.
And so I was just wondering if you would take a little time to talk about we've become so divided from our police officers are there to protect us. And
Right.
yes, sometimes people do bad things. And I'll also say, I wanted to be a police officer that was one of the jobs I wanted. And my father said, no, no, no. You
Right.
see the worst of people, Deborah, you'll never be able to handle it. You will not be able to handle it. You will cry. My dad knew me.
Right.
And so I made a decision not to do that. But you see the best and the worst of people in these crisis situations. And I remember also, as this pandemic was happening, I called you, I was talking to you one night, and you said that you had responded to a call because there were white neighbors and African-American neighbors that had forgotten that the governor said we were supposed to be social distancing, and they were fighting with each other on, so it
Right.
must be an intense time but it seems like we're very broken. And what I don't want us to do is I don't want us to stop talking about, for example, Black Lives Matter,
Right.
because there is a problem, and I think it is time to resolve the problem. But I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind talking about, from your perspective of a long-term, being in this field a long time, what do you think? What do you think we should be doing? What should society be doing? Because we've got a problem, a bad problem.
Well, the problem is we all need to be working together, but I don't care what the profession is. There are going to be some bad seeds in there.
Right.
And what happens is that bad seed makes the news, and people see that uniform, and they just generalize and think that every officer is like that. I've spent 31 years, and I always talk about trying to break that wall down. I feel like that uniform sometimes is a wall. And you brought up fire and EMS. Everybody's thrilled to death when the fire department or medics get there. Everybody there is usually happy as they can be.
Mm-hmm.
But usually when police are called, there's usually at least one person there that does not want us there.
Right.
And we have to take that into account. The big joke is everybody loves firefighters. Oh, everybody loves firefighters. But I feel like some of the damage to the image of law enforcement, we've done to ourselves. And now you've got the cameras that are just sharing it with everybody. I don't agree with what happened in Minneapolis. If I saw one of my officers doing that, I would grab them and they would be off of him very quickly. However, I was not there, so I don't know the totality of those circumstances. Secondly, I don't know, I know what I was trained throughout my career, how to take people into custody. And my thing is, once I place them under arrest, they are my responsibility. I am responsible. So
what do you mean by
anything.
that? Tell me what you mean by that.
Anything that happens to them after I take them into custody and handcuff them, it's on me, because my job at that point is, yes, they may have committed a crime, but I am there to take care of them and make sure they are safe. I do my job. If I have to take them to jail, I take them to jail. Mm-hmm. But my job, once I place them in the handcuff, they are my responsibility. And anything that happens to them after that is on me. And that's why you have to, it's a very delicate job that we have. And, again, I was sworn to protect and serve everybody. And
even African Americans.
Everybody. And, that's how I approach my job. And you alluded to it. This job, years ago, it used to be a matter of putting a uniform on and going, arresting criminals, enforcing traffic. And that was the gist of it. But as time has progressed, many of the responsibilities and areas that we have to deal with, law enforcement, we become social workers.
I know, and you community planners and
yeah, and it's a completely different ball of wax. And we get calls from mom or dad calling because their 6-year-old child refuses to go to school.
Wow.
Now,
I didn't know we could call the police for that.
You can call. Hey, if you call, we have to respond. If you call, we have to respond. We get calls about neighbors cutting the grass and shooting the grass on my yard, and they won't stop doing it.
Wow.
And we get there and say, have you asked them not to do that? Well, no, I want y'all to tell them. So we're involved in so many different aspects. And it's not like it was 31 years ago. It is a completely different world now. And you said we see the richest of the rich, we see the poorest of the poor, we see the transient. I want every officer, because I try to do it, I don't care who they are. You treat them the same. They may be down on their luck. One day you might be in that position where you have no house, you have no vehicle. You might be in that spot. And we've got to treat people consistently, I guess you could say, across the board. It doesn't matter who you are. You took an oath, and now follow that oath.
Right. And in the background, a lot of you might know Doug Foresta. He's my producer, and he is also a mental health professional. And I just want to, he made a comment in the background, and he says, there needs to be members of the police department integrated who are mental health / social work professionals. In my opinion, it's not fair to ask someone with general training to handle all that. And yet we do.
Well, what has been incorporated over the past few years is crisis intervention training. It is mental health training. And I know my agency, and it's been a big push all across the country, it's CIT, being CIT certified. And I know it's a 40-hour course that every officer in my agency goes through. And it's how to interact and deal with individuals who have mental health disorders. And, autism, Alzheimer's, dementia, they are not mental health disorders. Many people that are dealing with those issues may have mental health disorders, but there are studies out there that show over 50% of interactions with law enforcement involve somebody with a disability.
Right, and there are studies that show that 65% of people that are in prison in the United States have disabilities. 65%, because a lot of people get in trouble because they do have mental health issues. And I know you'll have to deal with it all the time. And I know that the work that you do all over the United States, and you have done some work globally as well, is about helping officers, law enforcement officers, really understand how to treat these people in a way that also, one of the things that you want to accomplish as a police officer is, when you go into a call, you want to see if you solve whatever's going on in a peaceful manner, obviously. And I think I want to make sure that we talk on air a little bit about the threats to our police officers as well, because I know that you have a police vehicle, and you park it in your driveway, and you have children, a wife, and a family, and during the rioting and stuff, police officers were being targeted, and I don't think that helps. And so, and I remember also, I told you this, I used to have a really terrible lead foot. I got a bunch of tickets when I lived in Florida, and when I moved to Virginia, I learned to slow down, Deborah.
Tone it down a little,
Tone it down. And but I remember the first time I was stopped by a police officer in Virginia, and my kids were actually in the car. What I did, because years before, this is what I'd done in Florida when I got stopped, was I would get out of the car and I would go towards the police officer. That's what I used to do. Well, let me tell you, when I got out of the car, the police officer started yelling at me, and he scared me. And I said that to you, and you explained what I'm going to let you talk about right now. Why do we stay in the car when a police officer, and I also want to make sure, if you don't mind, that we talk about, I want to make sure after we do this, that we do talk about darker skinned Americans and some of the experiences they're having, because they are very different experiences than I'm having with law enforcement and so I want us to address the gigantic elephant in the room, but let me turn that over to you first, because I want to talk about human beings being safe, and that includes police officers as well.
Right. And yeah, it's a very uncomfortable feeling when you do pull a car over and all of a sudden that door comes flying open. From your days in the academy, and they're teaching you what could happen. You as a law enforcement officer, you're supposed to be in control of that situation or that incident. And you don't want that person just freely walking back towards you. There have been officers who've been killed because they were still sitting in the driver's seat. And during the academies, they show you pictures and it's actual footage of officers getting injured. And you're trying to control the scene, keep the person controlled. You're not trying to control the person, but you're trying to just isolate that little world that you're in at that moment, keeping it safe, not just for you. Somebody may throw the door open and step out into traffic and get hit by a car.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's not just for the officer's safety, it's for that individual safety. And, you know, it is kind of unnerving because 90% of the time you pull cars over, they sit in the car, you walk up, you talk to them. So it's rare to have the door to come fly open because you don't know what's coming. You don't know, you know, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, when you pull a car over, you don't know. Did that person just rob a convenience store? Did they just hurt somebody? You don't know the background. You just know you're pulling a car over for a traffic infraction. So you really don't know what you're walking up on. And, you know, it's a very sticky situation. And you really, you know, you can be nervous and concerned, but you still got to be professional and you've got to do your job. And that's what you're sworn to do. If you have issues doing that, you know, this job, the law enforcement is not for everybody. And it's, if you try this job or you do this job for a couple of years and you may say, you know, this is just not for me. There's no problem with that. This job is not for everybody. I've had to do things and come back later going, I can't believe I was in the middle of that. You know, but
I imagine the turnover is high, isn't it high, Tim?
It is, you know, and it's always been somewhat high because people get into it, and what you see on television and all of these police shows is not what you are doing out there. Like I said, we're doing a lot of social work. And
I think those shows do a disjustice. I think I personally do not think that we should watch shows where people are being put in really awkward situations and we get to laugh because the guy came out and his wife beat her. And I think that is adding to the problems. So I think that, you know, the cop shows and bad boy, what you're going to do. I think that's just making things worse. But Tim, let's talk about, I want to give you two stories. You know, one of these stories. One of these stories is one of my friends, and she looks like me. She got gray hair and she's Caucasian, and there was a car, it was late at night, and there was a car behind her, and the car was too close behind her, and it was actually sort of scaring her. And so she started making erratic turns and turning off, and finally this car just stayed with her, and she got really scared. And so she pulled in her driveway, and she's a woman that lives alone, and the car came in behind her, and she was terrified. And then all of a sudden the police lights come on. So she jumps out of the car, which you just said we're not supposed to do. And she starts yelling at this young police officer, "What are you doing? You scared the..." And she just lost it. She was so scared. And then he was sort of taken back, and he stepped back and he's like, "Well, you were driving erratically." And she said, "Because you scared me." So it was interesting, the response. She was shaking. Everything calm. He left. She went inside. She's like, "Oh my God, I yelled at a police officer." All right. So you have that story. And then I have another friend of mine who's an African-American, and she had come home from the airport. She had her two beautiful little babies, and they were in their pajamas and they were in the car seat. And she pulls into her driveway, and a police car pulls in real fast behind it and flashes a light. She was so scared, Tim. She was so freaked out. She wasn't sure what was going to happen. She got on the phone with her parents, and she's like, "I've been pulled over." And she was so scared something was going to happen to her when she got out of that car with the police officer, and her children were going to watch it. And I was telling her about the experience of the white woman that I know, the older white woman. And she's like, "I would never yell at a police officer. I would never yell at a police officer. I would be afraid for my life." So that makes me very sad, because we know. So what is going on here? Because we know there's a problem, and I know you don't know. You just have more knowledge about this than we do. And so something is going on. Something is going on. And I know it's not, like you said to me when I watched that horrible video of that man killing that other man, murdering that man right on video. And I know that there's some white supremacists, and we're going after the race war. And I know there's more to these conversations, but this does seem to be ongoing violence towards people with darker skin in our police departments. I mean, so let me, will you tell us what's going on? I mean, are we
I'm not gonna
misunderstanding it?
I'm not gonna dive into the whole racial aspect of everything. You and I discussed the other day when we were talking, and I told you there are people out there in society that know nothing about me or the people I work with, but they would like to hurt me or kill me because I wear a uniform.
Right.
And so that puts me in the same, I guess, picture as, there are people that don't like me just because of that uniform, and they wish harm to me because of that uniform. And I would just encourage every officer to look at the fact that, and like I told you the other day, I will pose this question: what color is your soul?
Right. I know. I loved that statement.
And
I
treat
agree.
everybody exactly like that. Everybody's equal.
I agree.
I
We
can't
need to
control
be
everybody else.
kinder. Right. We need
I
to be
can't
kinder
control,
to each
and
other. And you say, and I agree with you, the media picks up on it, but still what has been happening lately is really chilling. But let's talk a little bit more about the work that you are doing, because I think it's very, very important that police officers understand the diversity,
right,
beyond the color of our skin, the
right,
diversity of the human beings that they're dealing with. And we've seen some terrible outcomes of people, with autism, with Down syndrome. We've seen some really terrible things happen. And so what you do is you train not only law enforcement, because you also will train corporations. This
right.
is really about people dealing with people. But tell us a little bit more about the work that you do to help other police officers and first responders, emergency response, make sure that they understand how to deal with somebody that has autism, or somebody that has an intellectual disability, or somebody like my husband that, with dementia and Alzheimer's, the person sometimes they can have, they can be seeing vision, sort of
Right.
like people with schizophrenia or mental health. And
Right.
and it might appear that they're, drugged out. Or so tell us a little bit more about your work, because I think it's very important, the work that you're doing. And I think that more people and corporations need to know about the work that you're doing. And that's why, once again, we're going to do a series of what you're
Right.
doing. But
Right.
tell us more about that.
I traveled around the state in late 2000s teaching law enforcement, public safety. And interesting side note, the CIT training I was telling you about for the mental health, even though what I do, the cognitive issues are not mental health issues, my agency has actually brought me in to do a block of training, because many times what you see with cognitive disorders is similar to what you would
I
see
agree.
with mental health, and the way you interact and deal with the person is very similar. With dementia, Alzheimer's, our whole agency is trained. I do a 4-hour block of both one autism ID and a 4-hour block of Alzheimer's dementia for our officers going out on the road. In my state, the autism is not mandatory. It's not mandated by the state for law enforcement, but my boss wanted his agency trained. And, through that training, we find that we've got tons of officers who have family members dealing with the same exact thing.
Right.
And some of them become very passionate, and they realize what I'm telling them could easily be applicable to their family member, and how their family member could end up in a bad situation. It's interesting. It was 2 weeks ago. We actually got a call in the county for a gentleman who pulled up at a convenience store, or it was actually an auto shop, and went in and started talking to him. Luckily, the owners picked up on something not quite right and realized he was 2 hours away from home.
Wow.
And he had not been reported missing, but they said something's just not. They would ask him questions, and he would fumble trying to give them an answer. He was mid-70s, and they noticed something was up, so they called, and my deputies picked up on it immediately. Oh my gosh, this is probably dementia. And they beat feet up there as quick as they could. I went up there because what we did not want to happen was to have him go out and get in his car. He had driven there.
Wow.
And all of a sudden take off. But he had been missing pretty much all day. And I sat down and talked to him and asking him questions, and he thought he was in Northern Virginia.
Okay.
That's exactly where he thought. As far as I'm concerned, in our conversation, he was in Northern Virginia. Because for me to explain to him that, no, you're not in Northern Virginia, you're here, in his mind, what he feels or thinks is the truth. So, and I'm not telling anybody to go out there with somebody with Alzheimer's dementia. I'm not telling you to go and make up lies and tell them lies. I'm telling you, go to where they are in their mind,
Right.
because that's their reality. You are going to them. With the dementia, I train the officers that, you go in and interact with somebody. Many times they're going to ask you the same question every 2 minutes, and don't get impatient. Don't get impatient with them. But you see, sometimes my officers have more training than the caregivers, because the caregivers are yelling and screaming because they won't stop asking me this and they won't stop asking me that.
Right.
I went and
They
met
don't
a
do a good
lady.
job.
No, but it's not by your own fault. Nobody has told you what to expect. And I love being able, who would expect somebody with a gun and a badge to come into the house, sit down at the kitchen table, and talk to me intelligently about what I'm living every day with being a caregiver for somebody with Alzheimer's dementia, or somebody, how much of a relief would it be for a parent when an officer comes in? It's a crisis situation usually when you have to call 911. But to be able to come in and sit down and speak intelligently, with autism, intellectual disability, okay, you can say, well, what's their method of stemming, to calm down. And you see a lot of hand flapping or spinning in circles where the individual's trying to cope with something that is overstimulated. But to have somebody with a gun and a badge who's supposed to be out there protecting society, the normal idea of protecting society with that gun and a badge, coming in, taking the time, sitting down, and they know a little bit about what I'm dealing with. So that helps break that wall down. It breaks that wall down and go, I understand what you're going through. I might not live it, but you can empathize with them.
Right.
And because a lot of these
you can treat them like a human, and understand how to treat them. Tim, I know that my daughter has Down syndrome, and she lives in a supported apartment. And
Right.
The first apartment she moved into, they tried it, and then they found that she was a better roommate for the other.
Right.
Well, the apartment she was in and the roommate she was sharing it with, it actually burned down. There were, I think, 14 to 16 apartments that caught on fire and burned. And so everybody was safe. Our county did a wonderful job responding to it. Everybody was safe. Things got burned, but people were okay.
Right.
And
you can replace property.
That's right. So the team working with my daughter were trying to do smoke alarms with her, fire drills, but loud noises hurts her ears. And so what she would do is she would just, go hiding in the closet. She would not respond appropriately to the fire drill. And so I talked to you about it. And one thing you had suggested, which I hadn't thought of, is first of all, let my local police department know that she is living in this apartment, just so they know what they're coming into.
Right.
So they would know, and you had said they would know to respond differently. But things like this are a really big deal. The police department should be our friends. They should help us. The police department now knows in my county, or let me just say 911, because maybe it's not always the police, but 911 knows that my husband has dementia and he has the tracker on, and so that they can better support me as a family. But I think sometimes we don't realize as individuals that we can partner with 911 to make sure they understand better how to help us. So, and I also just want to continue to say, and also Tim has his own business. It's called, I believe, A Better Understanding. betterunderstanding.com. And so he doesn't just train other police officers. He also he trains community leaders, he trains nonprofits, he trains corporations, because how do we learn to really understand who we each are? How do we make sure that, because it is hard as a caregiver. So I want you to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, actually the website is a-betterunderstanding.com. and there's tons of information. But you know, kudos to you, Deborah, because and I guess like you said, a lot of people don't realize it. You were willing to disclose the information. And I've traveled across the country and taught for many public safety agencies, and every single one it's consistent. They have a computer system. They can flag addresses. They can put notes in there. So as far as your daughter, the fire department now knows if they get dispatched to that apartment building, it's going to come up on the screen. The dispatcher is going to relay it to the firefighters that there is a 30-some-year-old girl with Down syndrome who lives in this particular apartment. Loud noises have an effect on her where she will probably get in the bed, hunker down, and she will not come out. So
Right.
those firefighters know when they get to that scene, they've got to get in there and get her out. And it might be a struggle because she's not going to want to leave. So don't
Right.
think you're
And
going to go in and say, hey,
she's
come with
become a
us.
big girl too. She's become a big girl and she's very strong.
Right.
And that
But-
also gets us in trouble too, because that's where we've seen the violent clashes with our police officers is
Right.
when you do have someone like my daughter that has become,
Right.
yeah.
But
And even
again,
worse for men, big men, but.
right. Well, it's all, I'm trying to give people a better understanding because my one goal in the law enforcement realm is to try to have, give people information that they can utilize because you don't know what you don't know. If you haven't been told it, you're not going to know it. But get out there and train people and get them to understand. So when we do have these encounters, when we do have these interactions, they are peaceful interactions, hopefully leading to positive outcomes.
Right.
Somebody with autism or intellectual disability, if they have one negative experience with a police officer,
Right.
that's embedded in their brain. And there have been situations across the country and across the world where somebody with autism was a child, had a negative encounter with law enforcement, and then they become an adult. And as soon as they see that uniform, they take off running. And me being a
Right.
police officer, depending on the circumstances of where we are, I may
Always somebody
think
running.
there
Right.
may have been a crime afoot and I'm in a foot chase after them. So that's why I love the tracking programs and things, or the meet and greets. I had recommended in a webinar I did last week, some of the group homes. Call the agency and see if you could do like a meet and greet, have some officers in uniform come over. A friend I talked with works here in Virginia also. They would have these tours. They would bring people with disabilities to the police station, and they have this fun festival day, and they would get to meet and greet officers. And they would actually take them inside, and they had a professional photographer volunteered their time, took a picture of the officer with that individual, gave them a 5x7 to take and put in their room because
Okay.
that officer's your friend. A very interesting story on the Alzheimer's realm was I had a gentleman call me and ask me if I could come out and talk to his mom about putting a tracker on. She has Alzheimer's. So I went out there. He said, I don't think she's going to wear it. There's no way she's going to wear it. And I said, well, let's give it a try. So when I walked in, she actually addressed me as an officer from where she grew up when she was little. She thought she was 2 counties over. Was I going to tell her, oh, no, I'm not one of those officers. I work here in this. No, I went to where she was. As far as I was concerned, whoever she thought I was, that's who I was. So I had talked to her for a while, and it was interesting because she started flirting with me. And I said, well, this might be an opportunity to be able to, he says she's not going to wear it. So what I did was kept talking. And then I said, I've got this thing I'd like for you to wear, if you would. And she looked at it and looked at her jewelry. And I said, well, no, that would clash with your jewelry. But what I'd like to do is have you wear it on your ankle. And she said, okay, I'll do it. So I put it on her, and we try to keep a photograph of everybody we put in our program. So in case we have a search, we'll go out and search. But we also want an updated photo. And I said, I need to take your picture. And she said, well, no, I've got to get my hair done. And I said, well, when is that? Her son said Thursday. I said, 2 days away. Okay. I said, well, you get your hair done. I'm coming back Thursday. So Thursday I pulled up and the sun came out and he said, I have no idea how you did this, but she still got it on. So I get ready to go in the house, and she ran through the whole house. And I looked at him. I said, well, what in the world happened? He said, well, she forgot to put her lipstick on. I said, okay, well, this is what I want you to do. I said, I want you to take the picture, but it's going to be of me and her.
Right.
So we took the picture, and I went and printed off a 5x7, put it in a frame, and I took it to him and I said, "Where does she spend most of her time?" And he said, "In that recliner over there." I said, "I want you to put this picture right beside that recliner. And if she ever asks you why she has this thing on her ankle, tell her boyfriend wants her wearing it." And she never took it off. Never took it off.
Oh.
But it's, I don't see it as lying. You're trying to go where they are.
You're humanizing the situation. You're not
Right.
lying. You're humanizing it. And I
Right.
know you have a really beautiful story. I know that I'm going long, but that's why we're going to do a series with
Right.
you. But do you mind talking a little bit about the hat, the story with the young man with autism and the hat? Because I love that story.
And this goes
And
back
that's
to
right.
Matthew
That's
Frank.
what you call it, your hat,
It
right?
is my
It's
hat, yes.
It is a hat. Okay.
And you're
I know
talking
they
about the
didn't have any-
picture. You're talking about the
Yeah.
picture of me and
Yeah,
Matthew.
it's such a beautiful.
There's a picture, and it's on my website. And it was like the shot heard around the world. There's Matthew Frank. It was a little boy I was talking about, who was the first boy I met with autism. Went in, and it was interesting because his mom said, "You better get ready because in about 6 months, you're going to be swamped," because she's very vocal. She has her own nonprofit
Okay,
that
cool.
she goes out there and tries to help families dealing with disabilities find resources. Well, I put Matthew in the program when he was 6 years old. His twin brother was in a wheelchair at the time. Wasn't really a wandering threat, but Matthew was non-speaking. He could say a few words. And it got to the point where something he would say, Mom would say, "Why?" I'd go over there, or one of the deputies go over there, and she says, "Matthew, why are they here?" And he said, "Keep me safe." He could tell you that. But he loved public safety. When he was 10 years old, in the early hours one morning, he passed away. Middle of the night. I got the call at about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I rushed over to the family's house, and I sat there with the mom and dad, and and the pastor, and we were talking. And Mom said, "Tim, would you speak at the funeral?" Of course I would. So a couple hours later, she said, she called me again and said, "I was wondering, is it possible to have deputies be pallbearers?"
Oh,
And I said, "Yes, you can." So
That's what
I
we
had
need.
deputies chomping at the bit to be pallbearers. They wanted to be pallbearers. So I actually contacted the fire department and said, "Look, Matthew loved public safety. Would you all help us with this funeral?" So the church held about 300 some people. I mean, it was packed, and the fire department had pulled up, and they had fire engines sitting in the parking lot with the lights on. And the funeral service went on, and then we had to head on up the road to the burial site, to the cemetery. And as we rode up the road, the firehouse on the side of the road, they had the engines pulled out sitting on the side of the road, and the lights were on. So we got up to the cemetery, and we turned into the cemetery, and they had the ladder truck with the ladder up with the American flag.
Oh,
And I was blown away. Well, we had the graveside, and then we left and went back to the church, and we were talking. And Joanna, his mom, comes up and she said, "He still got it." And I said, "He still got what?" And she said, "The transmitter." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I said, $300 transmitter. I was like, "That's fine." She said, "Well, what we did was we cut it off of him and we put it on his teddy bear, and we put the teddy bear in the casket with him."
oh, you're gonna make me cry. So
And
stop.
to see the impact, just the impact, these tracking systems are great to be able to go out and search for people when they're missing. But I think it's an avenue to be able to build the relationships with the families.
Right.
Because usually many times people dealing with disabilities, when things do get out of control, they're very hesitant to call 911 because they're worried about officers showing up. And many times when officers do show up, they leave with somebody.
Right.
Or they call adult protective services, or they call
Right.
child protective services because they don't understand.
Right.
And so these families and these caregivers deal with extraordinary situations and try to handle themselves by themselves. But when it gets to the point where it's just overwhelming, they can't do it anymore. They call 911, and it's a crisis situation.
And everybody's
So if
freaked out and
if
scared.
the officer's never seen that uniform, if the individual's never seen that uniform, we coming in, autism, they love routine. They routine and structure. Well, at that point, when it's a crisis, if they've never had exposure to an officer except for what they've seen on television, that officer comes in, that's a change of routine. So you may have them acting out anymore. going out and doing the meet and greets and disclosing this information to the officers, to the public safety officers, to the dispatchers, so they've got it in the computer system, that gives that uniform time or ability to be able to come in, interact with the family, become that friend that they're not so scared of, and they're used to seeing. We're not out of the norm. And then when the crisis is happening, maybe we can come in, they're used to that uniform, and maybe we can. I've got one boy who actually, he's got autism, but one of his fixations is the Baltimore Orioles. He knows everything there is to know about the Baltimore Orioles. And I know if I go over there and try to have a conversation with him and it's going nowhere, he wants to talk about what he wants to, and I can't get information. I know if I bring up the Baltimore Orioles, I've lured him in and he's going to start talking, and I can ask him other questions in the middle of that, but I've drawn him in. And it's knowing those triggers that will calm them down, and the triggers that set them off, because you want to leave those triggers alone. You don't want to set them off, but knowing what calms them down and helps have that peaceful interaction. And again, leading to a positive outcome where nobody got hurt and everybody was taken care of.
Tim, how many families do have these? I know I'm one of the families that have it with my husband. How many families in the county that you cover have this?
In my county, it's 130.
All right. So that's 130 families. That's pretty impressive.
And I don't think it's even scratching the barrel.
I agree, because most people don't know about it still.
Right.
And so you usually don't find about it till you wish you knew about it.
Right.
But I think the training that you do, and I've seen some of the training, it is top-notch professional, really engages, talks about who we are as humans. That's why I think human potential. But I wish every single law enforcement, county, every single one in the world, because this is not just a U.S. problem. This is a global problem.
Oh, it's global.
I know I connected you with the officer I'd spoken to about cybersecurity, Sheldon, in the United Kingdom, which is amazing, the work he's doing. But I love the work you're doing because you're humanizing the situation, and you're you're one of the good ones, and you've done this for 31 years, and I know you're going to retire soon, and you want to focus on this full time. But I would really recommend any corporations, any nonprofits. I would recommend Tim as a speaker. I would recommend Tim somebody to even to consult with. So yeah, you can have him come in and train you, but you could also consult with him just to find out what could you, as for example, if you're a nonprofit that supports people with autism, you could bring him in to consult with how do you let the families know? How do you do programs? I think we need to take what you're doing and we need to really expand it so that more people are getting the information. I'm blessed to, happen to be in a county that, is represented by a police force that really wants to work with the community. But there's just so many things I think that you could do, which is why I want your voice to be heard, and I want my audience to know about the work you're doing. It just started raining real hard here, so. but Tim, I know that I've gone too long, and that's why once again we're going to have Tim on multiple times. But if you're, the police brutality, the problems that we're having, all police aren't bad. I think we need to look at people like Tim that are really changing the world, and we need to hear what he has to say. And the reality, if you're talking to police force, it's going to make a lot more sense for them to talk to a fellow police officer, or even if they're retired, because they understand the world that they're living in. So Tim, once again, and I'll provide all this stuff, but tell us your website, tell us how he also blogs. He's written 4 very recent blogs, including one on COVID-19 and the pandemic, and really keeping people with autism, people with Alzheimer's, intellectual disabilities, dementia safe during these pandemic times. I highly recommend reading that blog, and we will be sharing it. But you're also on social media. So do you mind just telling us once again, and you can always come to me if you're a company that wants to hire him as a strategist, a consultant, a trainer, happy to connect you to them. But Tim, tell us how we can get a hold of you.
Yeah, the website is a-betterunderstanding.com. Email info@a-betterunderstanding.com. The other contact information is on there. You can look for A Better Understanding on Facebook. I'm right there trying to share what I'm doing. But I wanted to,
and LinkedIn. You're
and
on
LinkedIn as
too?
well. I'm on LinkedIn as well, and I've been able to link in with a lot of people who are interested. And it's, one of the big questions I always get is from people is as in law enforcement and other places is, what does law enforcement have to do with Alzheimer's or autism? I don't get it. Well, I hope I've been able to share with you some information to show you why it is very important to get it out there. But I would also like, to share with everybody what Deborah said, human potential at work. Police officers are human.
Yes, yes.
Humans make mistakes sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I've made mistakes. So all of us do it. That uniform does not make us perfect. And just realize officers do make mistakes. But the goal is to get out there and train up. Law enforcement, like I told you, it started with law enforcement because we've got the tools that injure and take lives. But I think the general population, anybody who comes in contact with the general population, needs to understand what's going on. Your corporations, the HR departments, just because somebody doesn't have the social skills or the communication skills doesn't mean they wouldn't be an amazing employee. Depending on where you put them in your agency or your department or your corporation, they could be a huge asset. But Deborah, I want to thank you for this opportunity. You've given me opportunity upon opportunity upon opportunity, and I'm blessed to know you. And I thank you so much for everything you're doing and everything you're doing to work with me.
Thank you, Tim. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that we all have unconscious bias. And so the work that Tim is doing is trying to eliminate some of those unconscious bias and, including, violence against people that have disabilities, the intersectionality of the diversity issues, African Americans with disabilities. And so I really believe in Tim's work. And I think that, this is how we start healing the world and learning to work together. And as you said, police officers are human beings too, and we all need to work really hard. But I actually am nervous and excited about you retiring at some point, Tim, because I believe your voice needs to be heard and you need to be talking part of the really important conversations of how do we really move forward and make it better so that the police are here to protect us all. And even if I've screwed up and done something wrong, you still can deal with me. The reality is sometimes there's crisis situations and adrenaline is jumping on all of our parts. But I think having these conversations are very important. And that's one reason why Mr. Sergeant Tim Sutton is going to come on air, and he's also going to be on Lamondre Pugh's 5P. Lamondre Pugh, as a reminder, works for me as my Chief Sustainability Officer. He is an African American and he has a physical disability, and they're going to have a very interesting conversation about these Black Lives Matters topics and really drill into it, and just try to understand it from a different perspective so that we can do better as society moving forward. So Tim, thank you. Thank you for your work. And I highly recommend him as a trainer, as a consultant, because I know he's made a huge difference for my family, but he's also made a huge difference for some of my clients as well. So Tim, thank you so much. Stay safe. All of you guys, stay safe out there. Everybody do your best to stay stable during these really intense times, but I believe that we're trying to learn to be better. So maybe in the long run, we're all going to be better and safer. And the world's going to work a little bit better for all of us. So thank you so much for watching the show. Thank you so much for being on the show, Tim. I can't wait to have you on again. It'll be in August.
Yes, it will.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.